Welcome to the Code of Traditional Archery, brought to you by Primitive Stone Archery and the founder, Grant Richardson.
Welcome to the Code of Traditional Archery podcast. I'm Grant Richardson, your host, and a big welcome to all the new people joining us, and a thanks of appreciation to those who have been following and supporting us so far. The Code of Traditional Archery is dedicated to the legacy I was raised with under the former Ontario Bowhunters Association. The efforts and work to create, implement, and forge the original primitive weapons and archery seasons and laws in Ontario will never be forgotten. You can find this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon Audible, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you like what you hear, leave us a comment, rating, and review. Our original intent of this podcast was to bring back traditional archery and bow hunting to an older era where hunting ability meant archer, and together the two formed a bow hunter. Shooting and hunting with recurves, longbows, and self-bows is more popular than ever. However, the approach is much more so an art and skill set, not a product, but a process. We're introducing a new format for the podcast, interviewing grassroots bow hunters to talk about their own lessons learned in the wilderness as it relates to the code of traditional archery. This episode, we chat with Mr. Matthew Morris, a lifelong outdoorsman, hunter, and family man. He was introduced to traditional bow hunting only a couple of years back and decided to jump in headfirst with the craft of bow making simultaneously. Since then, Matthew has started the side passion of song dog stick bows and is the host of the Bowyer podcast. So I want to welcome Matthew Morris to the Code of Traditional Archery from Song Dog Stick Bows. And Matt, I'll let you kind of kick it off and give us a little bit of your background and who you are and what you do and all that great stuff. And then I can start picking your brain.
Hey, brother. Thanks for having me. It still tickles me that I've been able to do a couple of these on somebody else's podcast now that anybody thinks that I'm cool enough to talk to. So I'm flattered, and I come here with humility and appreciation. So thanks for having me on. So lifelong hunter, was a military and then a government guy for, roughly, 20 years combined. Now I work, I'm a space nerd, I guess, as my kids would say. Still spend a lot of time outdoors, hunting, fishing, live out here on a river in North Carolina, and picked up a compound bow when I was like 14 and hunted with a compound for, 20 years or so or more. And within just the last few years, I attended a bow making course through Organic Archery, hosted by Corey Hawk, who's a great friend of mine and a bow making mentor. And that kind of changed my trajectory with hunting, where I, built my first longbow made out of hackberry and dove right into making bows. And now I guess I approach that with some humility and say I'm an aspiring amateur bowyer. But I have a little side hustle where I make bows for gifting, but also I sell a few here and there through Song Dog Stick Bows. And early this year, I was talked into starting a podcast by the guys over at OKest Hunter. And we now have a podcast called the Bowyer Podcast, which releases a new episode every Wednesday. So that's me in a nutshell, and as cool as I can make myself sound.
That's awesome. So you must have had a unique connection with Corey because he's got service member background as well, correct?
Yeah, he's a fellow jarhead like me. We're both right Marines. I worked in the intelligence community. I think he was, he might have been an artillery guy. I can't remember. But we both had, several deployments under our belts. So we throw out some big words from time to time, but we're mostly doing grunts and scratches and nodding and eating crayons and when we have our fellowship and conversation.
Yeah, you could probably make some money off of some sort of crayon stick bow, sort of self bow of some kind.
Yeah. We'll donate that to some Marine Corps organization next year, and it'll have all the colors stuff from a basic crayon box.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, just put "Don't Eat" on it somewhere where the specs are on the bow.
Well, on one of my bookshelves, I've got some of those the chewing gum crayons. This is
yeah. That's fantastic. So like the Code of Traditional Archery originally, like we did a story kind of teach, tell, lessons learned format with it, almost like an AAR kind of format. And of course, a lot of times, and then I built my book around that and really kind of built upon that quite a bit more. There's a lot more involved in the book, of course, in the podcast, but the written word, of course. But all that being said, it was really been around that heritage and process that I find the traditional community is known for. And I started seeing a couple things that kind of bothered me because I had all my kids have shot a bow. My oldest son has hunted with me. He's an amateur MMA fighter going pro here shortly, and he's busy with that stuff. And then my middle daughter's a singer-songwriter, and she loves turkey hunting and hunting, shooting her longbow. But my youngest daughter, she was just like crazy about it, like absolutely like maniacal. It's almost like, her bow was under her pillow at night kind of attitude. And, but I started sort of, seeing what she was looking at both on YouTube and other, social media things and, the impression she was getting things. And she'd be like, how come that guy shot at that bear? Like it was walking towards him. I'm like, well, I don't know. And I started sort of seeing this and a conversation with my father, and I started really realizing we'd kind of gone into a product over a process approach in general, not just with traditional bows. So a lot of folks get the wrong impression that I'm kind of some sort of elite thing, but it's not about that. It's about the failure. I mean, it's like fly fishing. I use that analogy. You can't walk into a store, grab a fly rod, and expect to walk into the stream the next day without hanging it up in the tree at the best of times, or even, getting your tippet tied on, let alone learning how to cast. So there's a process. And I'm kind of trying to, navigate that process without the product and that elitism attached to it. Like fly fishing became a big elite thing at one point too, right? And it's funny because I use a lot of vintage bows. I still do. I can't wait for Josh, my friend who's bought Damon Howard Archery and is pushing it now. He's a solid guy. He's a great guy. I can't wait for him to come out with some of the new, especially the Dreamcatcher Conviction. Josh, if you're listening to this, got to get that bow out. So I shoot like a vintage 72 high speed.
Very cool.
But people say, why do you shoot that bow? There's so many other options. I'm like, well, I'm a Damon Howard person, always have been. It's like kind of like my little baseball mojo thing, like baseball player mojo thing. But on the other hand, apart from that, it's like my old Fenwick fly rod my dad made when I was 8 years old, a brown glass fly rod that looks like it's been shut in 50 car doors. I've caught more fish on that than I have the Loomis graphite that costs $350. It still does the job, and you're making self bows, So other than Corey, what we talk about is weapons proficiency, ethics, and conservation and stewardship. But from a weapons proficiency point of view, you've got a different perspective as a bowyer. I tried making 3 bows. I remember Dean Torges and I had talked when I was in my 20s, long time ago. And so I jumped right into it, and I ruined the first 2 bows. I chased the rings way too far. And even in the first tailoring, I was impatient. I did not give it time. And so the third one I built, it was removed from my person. I have no idea who has that. It was the only one. But so I have a lot of admiration for that, but I digress. Tell me a little bit about weapons proficiency with a self bow. Talk to me a little bit.
I think it's like I think a good comparison is when you harvest your own food, whether it's in your garden or a meat chicken or your eggs or from wild game, your bounty that you find in the forest or the field. When you're cooking that meal, a lot less goes to waste, and you have just a stronger appreciation for it. And whether it really tastes better or if there's a placebo effect, like in your heart and soul, you feel like it tastes better and it's more special.
Yeah.
And having like your kids involved it makes it that much more special and meaningful too, right? You're less willing to discard it to the compost or whatnot. And I look at some of that same, a similar comparison through making self bows, right? I'll probably never have enough finesse to make high-end glass bows and recurves and all that stuff, because I really appreciate the journey of having a single piece of wood and using majority of hand tools and finding a bow inside this log somewhere. Right. And when I first started this journey, I was like, I'm going to make a bow that is, 64 inches in length. It's going to be 2 inches wide at the fades, and it's going to pull between 49 and 53 pounds. Well, that's like what? And like insane hubris that is, because that wood tells you what kind of bow is in there. You don't right. force it, because if you do, you're probably going to regret it, right? You're gonna break your bow during the tillering process. You're going to make a bow that comes out way too light because you tried to force it into something that it didn't want to be,
Right.
or you're going to break something during the QC process. I before I will gift or sell a bow, I'm going to shoot it 50 to 150 times, right?
Right.
Just over and over and over and over. And it's just one of those things. So you appreciate the wood and the journey of that bow. You appreciate its limitations. I think maybe you take care of it a little bit more as
Sure.
well. And then I think it gives you a little bit more heart or desire to be proficient with that tool. Um, when you make a bow yourself and it's simple by design, shoot off the knuckle, longbow, you have to work a little harder to be more proficient with it. And let's face it, any longbow or recurve bow is difficult enough, right? And then the self bow is just a smidge more difficult when it comes down to it. And
Sure.
I've
Yeah.
never been like, oh, I'm such an awesome hunter. I transitioned to this path because I'm too awesome at the other things. Hunting's not challenging anymore. Like hunting is still hard as hell, regardless of tool, platform, whatever. It can
Yeah.
be less challenging, throughout the spectrum, but I think it can be as challenging as you want to make it, right? That being said, it's the journey has been that much more special. I also say like I'm a hunter first and a bow hunter second, right? Like I like to hunt with a rifle. I love look it, it's rifle season. I've got a bow in my truck right now, and I've got a little lever action 35 Remington in there the same time. And I probably don't know what weapon I'm gonna pull out right now until I get to my destination. Like it's
Sure.
just I'm also like we're halfway through the season and I've only got one deer on the ground, so I really want to get a few more. So it just depends what my mood is in or my motivation at that time, or maybe the wind or what
Yeah.
stand I'm going to use. Um, but also with that, using like the self bow, you're going to find a way to where you can pick up that tool a little bit more frequently.
Mhm.
And what make bow making helped me do is love archery. Like I always loved bow hunting, but I never
Right.
really loved archery. Like
Sure.
I'm still not like, oh, I'm going to go to some foam festival and all of these things. I don't. I know it helps you gain proficiency and with fellowship, but I'm never going to be a guy that goes and competes at like 3D target shoots. Like that's not
Sure.
appealing to me. It's about as appealing as golf, and I also don't play golf.
Right.
But I love to shoot out back with my friends and my kids in my backyard and all that good stuff. What making bows did for me, and then in turn traditional archery, it also made me love archery and not just bow hunting.
Right.
And it's just, I don't know. I know I didn't give you a black and white answer, but I don't think it was really a binary question. But
No.
that's kind of the touchy feely of my response.
Yeah, that's like for me, it really isn't so much a binary question. And the whole purpose behind and this is not a reboot, this is a progression for me in this podcast. Quite frankly, I wanted like the ethical predator we have on the app. The ethical predator really goes and defines these things on an individual personality basis, but it doesn't talk about the lessons learned so much. Process. And what I wanted to do with this was have grassroots bow hunters come on, or Bowyers, and talk about their own lessons learned and the failures. I mean, like I said before, I cannot believe how difficult it was for me to. And I was younger when I was trying to build those self bows, so I didn't have that patience I probably do now, 35 years later, But I think it's that little bit that accompanies that's important, because I can't imagine having that patience transfer. Like I remember you talked about the 3D and the foam thing. So I shot a lot of 3D traditional quite a long time ago. And I shot for Damon Howitt when they were part of Martin Archery still. And they sent me two bows. They sent me a Hunter and they sent me a Dreamcatcher. I had the chance to buy the Dreamcatcher. I sure wish I would have. My daughter would have loved that bow. But all that being said, I did fairly well. And I'm not going to say how well I did because then, you'll say I'm bragging. If I told you I didn't do well, you'll say I'm lying. So the thing is I did very well. And I sent the old owner back who had never been a bow hunter before or anything like that. He's sort of gotten into it from the compound side. And, hey, this is what happened. Look at this. This is what's going on. And people people would go crazy over looking at those bows because they're beautiful bows. They're very functional. And he's like, we don't have the interest in Canada. Send the bows back to us if you don't want to buy them. That was it. I'm like, what did I just do for 2 years? This is crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
How
So,
unfortunate. I mean,
you know,
look, when it comes to money and finance, like, right, like I think that it's growing here in the States, but that doesn't mean it's growing in place of the high tech easy path either. I think it's growing,
yeah,
but it's not commensurate to the same level that people are putting, these Garmin sights with their compounds that do the range automatically and the crossbows
yeah,
with high-end optics and all of this stuff either, right? Like I fully acknowledge that I think traditional practices for whether that's traditional archery, even like flintlocks and muzzle loading, I feel
hmm
like is growing, which I'd love to see. There's something nostalgic and special about it. But I also still think like on the other end of the spectrum, it's still probably growing faster because it looks cool, right? You can have some
yeah.
dude that does CrossFit or some OnlyFans babe out there holding a big deer head with the
I know,
$2,500 compound bow with all the bells and whistles, and it's going to get a lot more
100%.
support, right?
Yeah, 100%. What you mentioned about weapons proficiency, there's actually a camp that's, I guess, up near Perry Sound that I know very well. And this guy now restricts all of his usage in the farm season to muzzleloaders. So he attracts people that are muzzleloader hunting, and he doesn't let them use inline, and he doesn't let them use scopes. He has his own restrictions he's placed on that. And a lot of people get ticked off. Oh, well, you don't have to go hunt there and pay him to hunt on his property then. So, and it's harder. People get out there and they're like, there's a buck 120 yards away, and they're like, I can't shoot at this thing, shooting a 50 cal money ball or something, like it's a lot harder, then you have to, as they say, keep your powder dry, and it rains a
Yeah.
lot and all that other stuff. So what he's done, he's really got a little niche for himself with that camp that he has now that he runs, and he rotates people out of that up there in that, they do 2 day hunts or something like that. And then the 3, I don't know how he runs it, but it's interesting. You talked about the weapons platform because and I said it in the book, it isn't really, I don't have a problem with the weapon. I have a problem with maybe how it's used in some cases, especially in the social media, uh, you know,
I
world.
just think there are seasons for the appropriate weapon,
Sure.
right? Is all. And I'm not an anti compound guy by any means. I'm definitely not an anti-compound guy. I'm not anti-crossbow. I just don't think it should be used during our short archery season.
Hmm.
Um, but like I don't know, that's just me and my opinion, and I'm kind of curmudgeon-y today maybe, but I just feel that there are appropriate seasons with appropriate tools and applications.
Yeah.
And I would love if we could embrace that instead of, I guess, feeding the machine a little bit too often, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I had a couple of folks I trained in the last year to pass the bow hunters hunt test. And in the app, we actually have a traditional bow hunting boot camp. It's extensive. It's like 6 weeks long, and it's a go at
Wow.
your own pacing. It's great, and a lot of the folks that they have to beat hunt tests in the state they're hunting in, right, to hunt with a bow. And these two guys were die hard. No, I'm going to pass hunt tests with my recurve. And they're like, I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, there's guys that show up and they just pass around the same crossbow that's sighted in, and then they go hunt with their traditional bow. I'm like, say what now? Like I floored by that. I'm like, what? Like I couldn't even believe even some of the compound guys because all they had to do was pass the hunt test, and if that weapon came in there, and they went and did it, and they passed. They got through it. I thought, that was good on them, because they were all being watched by everybody there. They're the only people there with recurves, one dude in New Jersey, another dude, elsewhere. It was crazy that they went through that, but I thought
Yeah,
good
that's
for
super.
them,
Yeah.
small percentage though. So moving on, let's move on to the ethics piece of that. You know, I mean,
Well, I mean, there's a
I know it's a personal thing. And I think that's
sure it
something
is, right?
it
It's
is,
it's
right?
definitely a personal thing, and I think it's good to caveat that as like the disclaimer. But I think ethics are in like more than just like appreciating the journey and the harvest of an animal in its life, right? I think that your practice that makes ultimately makes proficiency is important, right? I
Right.
like I'm not the best archery shot. Like whether it's a compound or a trad bow, like I'm never going to claim to be like that guy that's, king of the mountain is offering all these shooting lessons, all that stuff. I'll never be that guy. I wish I was. I'm not. I'm just, I accept my limitations, but because of that, I probably have to practice a lot more than other people.
Yeah.
Says I tell the people that work for me, I'm like, I'm never the smartest guy in the room. That's why I hired all of you. If you're the smartest one in the room, you've outgrown your space.
Sure.
I'm always going to be one of those guys that has to shoot more often than not, whether that's a recurve or longbow or self bow. And but that's also part of the journey that makes me feel a lot better in the woods when I'm making a shot on an animal, a
Sure.
living
Yeah.
sentient being, has a life and a soul and feels pain. And I think that is part of the journey, right? I think within the ethics is how you partake in fellowship and are a steward of your craft and your trade, whether that's making bows or bow hunting or hunting in general or fishing is being a good steward with your peers and people that are prospectively coming into the sport of hunting and harvesting game. And for me, which is really important is with my kids is how I inform and mentor and shape and influence their habits and psyches and thought processes when it comes to
Yeah.
taking the life to sustain, right? To harvest wild game, to put food on the table.
Mhm.
And, I've said this probably a number of times, but when I've had people, particularly non-hunters, have said like, "Oh, what's it?" Well, I know you love animals. Look, I've got 3 dogs, I've got 4 chickens, and a rat. Okay,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
so I got no authority in my house, right? They just bring stuff home, and I just kind of just here I am, right? But I love animals and I love wildlife. I love taking photos of wildlife. I pass more deer than I shoot because I love watching them. I still think bears are the funnest to hunt because I love watching bears.
Hmm.
Um, but I also love taking wild game, and we can say it's harvest or taking or whatever, but we're killing something, right? I really enjoy killing a beautiful animal, knowing that it's going to put food on my table. But what I also tell people that's equal parts joy and equal parts remorse, right? Like if you don't feel a little bit of guilt in that process, like maybe you aren't taking it seriously enough. And again, ethics
Yeah.
are personal. So this is my personal thought or my personal feelings. But if you don't have some remorse in there, um, then maybe you need to reflect a little bit more on the process and the journey and what the end state is. And we're relatively spiritual in this house. I get down and
Yep.
I thank God, I thank the deer, I thank Earth. We put tender grass in the pig or the deer or the bear's mouth for its
Yep.
final journey. Like it's a whole big ceremonious thing,
Sure.
whether it's myself when I'm by myself or with one of my friends that I'm trying to introduce in hunting or with my children. And I think for all parties involved, it weighs a little bit more heavily that way. That
Hmm.
any of that makes any sense.
It does. Dave Tetzlaff and I talked about this in the audiobook we did. We talked about this a lot offline too. Of course, he's the co-editor of Nutrition Boner magazine. And Dave and I, we really came to, a lot of people, we talk about predators in general, if you watch any predator, whether it's a big cat or anything, they're not successful, you know, at all. Their odds, and even a young falcon, an accipiter, like a hawk of some kind, they miss, they collide with things. There's that difficulty in that raw nature that we've kind of been, won't name the company, but conditioned to sometimes. My youngest daughter got pushed back on that in grade school by saying, yeah, for this particular movie, the deer actually mate in the fall. They don't mate in the spring, and they are actually very cantankerous for a certain amount of period of time. And well, how would you know this? She said, well, I've seen a doe beat its yearling off with its hoofs so it could get the apple versus the yearling. And the teacher's kind of like, what? I mean, and that's sort of that part of anthropomorphizing creatures that, some people have tended to do to try to connect with them like that. I always like to say, well, we've been connecting with creatures and appreciating them for hundreds of years, thousands, I should say, correction, thousands and thousands of years by hunting them and learning about them. And in doing so, not being successfully, like, I had a guy ask me about the legend, which is actually in the book, that it's one of my, it's a story I didn't want to tell because it's so personal to me. Because I let this old guy pass a couple of times, and when I had a chance at him, I didn't have a buck tag; I only had doe tag left.
Mm.
And I saw him his last time I saw him, and I got to compress it for the story. But when I found his bones, and I found where he bedded down within 20 feet of a tree I hunted him in 7 years earlier, and never got a chance at him. And he was bedded down there, and I found him curled up, literally curled up, bedded down, and he obviously died in his sleep. His one brow tine was broken off from a pretty bad fight. He had scars all over his skull. And I sat down with that deer for about an hour with a skeleton. And that was in the spring. I'd lost some arrows shooting at grouse early that year there, and I was going looking for them. And it was, I was mourning him. And I tried
That's funny,
hunting
man.
him for 10 years,
Yeah.
and, and my mother said, that's quite the, that you never told me about that. You told me you found him. I said, yeah, I took his skull and I have it in the back room. And it's almost like a reverence thing, like, just to his whole life. Because I thought, all the things I knew of a couple of poaching attempts on him because we caught them on camera.
Mm.
Caught them in the back pit. We put a trail camera up to try to see who was doing it. We knew they were poaching back there. We found deer hair. We even found a casing next morning after a night. So we put this up, and I thought, he was so tenacious, the life he lived and the things that he taught me and the things he did. You could put a human nature tag on him, but a lot of people say you should have dropped him that last day you saw him when he was old and decrepit. And I'm like, well, Ontario aged his jaw at about anywhere from 9.5 to 11.5 years old
Wow, what an old man.
in
Holy
a
moly.
northern climate
Yeah.
like us. I think that our average temperature in December here can, I think the coldest I've hunted is about minus 24 Celsius
Yeah.
here off
Jeez.
the ground. And I thought, he survived all those years, and, and the last time I saw him, he obviously had some sort of injury. His back was up and kind of looking funny, and something had happened. But you know, I was happier finding him and his skeleton than I was if I'd shot him. You know,
Yeah, I mean, that's a long,
you
amazing
know,
life, right?
the
Yeah.
closure was a lot different than if I'd arrowed him. And I had, he was a pretty darn big buck. Like, he was pretty crazy
Oh, and
looking
I'm
buck.
sure he had been going downhill in size for the
Oh,
past 3 years,
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
100%.
I can only
Yeah,
imagine when he was at 6 and 7.
right. So, and we see there's two or three bucks that run that swamp that look a lot like him. They have that genetic frame that he had. It's kind of cool to see that. But I digress. So, that sort of accompanies the conservation and stewardship side of the house. I really kind of, I guess, approach that with that. But you were talking about sort of that camaraderie, that campfire thing. And I find when it comes to the conservation and stewardship side of things, like, I've really gotten my kids involved in the prep thing way earlier with either habitat remediation or things like that, or even, trying to get them to identify certain things, in that process of bow hunting or hunting of any kind. And so a lot of the time you'll hear me say traditional bow hunting, but I also flip that and like to say hunting traditional, you know, that hunting traditional part, because you can hunt traditional without all of that product with any weapons platform, with anything. I mean, my grandfather's, he hunted with a 32 caliber lever action. He would walk out and, you know what I mean? And he'd go for a walk, and that was hunting to him. He would go for a walk and sneak and stop, and that was hunting to him. Right. And he was like, it was that woodsman kind of effect, is I guess what I'm talking about, that accompanies that stewardship. And, talk to me a bit about that. Give us an example, because I always want to do this with this podcast. Give me an example of something that you failed at and learn from, because that's something that's going to accompany this too, as a
Man, I mean, I'm constantly failing. I fail at making bows, and I was just I think it just published this morning. I was on a I had Dan Santana, who is a master bowyer and really just cool as a cucumber, and he has a great YouTube where he gives tutorials on making bows, and
Yeah.
I don't really break bows anymore unless I mean to, and I'm like, yeah, that must be nice. I still probably break, 1 out of 5 during the building process, at this point. But also just hunting. Like to be honest, man, I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast, but I had a buddy in recently who's been hunting. I first introduced him to hunting in 2018. We went out antelope hunting with another friend, and I got a nice antelope with my compound as my first spot and stalk archery antelope. It was super proud of it. It's hanging on my wall over here.
Wow.
And but the thing is, we went out the night before, and we all tend to like bourbon when we're drinking, sitting around the campfire in the middle of Wyoming.
Yeah.
And then when we got up, we are going to drive to our destination. We stopped by the gas station to get like Gatorades and coffee and stuff. And he managed to get a gas station hot dog that had probably been sitting on that burner for days. And about halfway there, we've got to pull over for several pit stops that he
Sure.
needed to make. And when we got out to start doing stalking, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to sit in the back and in the back seat. I'll catch up with you guys." And look, I probably had 10 failed stalks at this point because
Yeah.
antelope are daggum hard to stalk in on, and with archery tackle. And I ended up getting this buck, and I was a little less soft in the middle then, and a little bit broader in the shoulders, and I had carried him back about 1.5 kilometers on my shoulders, and field
Right.
dress. And my buddy is asleep, drooling against the window in the back of the pickup. And I knock on the window, and he about pees his pants. He gets scared. He's scared of me. He goes, "You didn't wait for me." And I was like, but it sounds so ignorant, right? But somebody that's never done this before, like,
Yeah.
it just sounded like it's such a naive thing to say, but we laugh about that, right? Because it's not how it works. But in
No.
turn, that guy has put out so much pressure. He lives out in Colorado now of trying to learn how to elk hunt and all these things. And he's gone out like every year since then to try to bag a mule deer or an elk and has not sealed it. But he still goes out and spends 7 to 10 days in the backcountry,
Sure.
camping, hiking with guns, hiking with his bow, and does this thing. Well, he came out here, and I say it's bear season. Bear season just started on Saturday. Well, unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we got this weird heat wave, and it's 80 degrees Fahrenheit right now, and everything's going nocturnal despite being in the rut. Like
Sure.
it's hot and miserable, and the mosquitoes have come back out because we live in the South. And I was like, at very least, I want him to bag a deer or a bear. Like it'd be awesome. That would just make my whole thing. It'd be special. Man, I ended up shooting honestly, it was a spike buck at that, which probably makes this whole story worse. On Saturday evening, about 40 minutes before last light, was very confident that I got this deer.
Yeah.
When I went out there to go track the deer down, there wasn't hardly any blood. There was actually a bit larger tuft of white fur, which for whitetails, that usually means a low shot, and you probably got underneath the belly, like between, that
Sure.
I shot too low. And we spent 2 hours tracking. We found 2 drops of blood the whole time. And then even came back the next morning, didn't hunt the next morning and didn't. But man, I haven't not recovered an animal for well over a decade, I think, at this point. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still, I'm uncomfortable talking about it.
Sure. Of course. Yeah.
It's just
Yep.
one of those things, right? Like, and you owe it to the animal to do your due diligence, try to find them. I think all the guys on TV or YouTube are like, "Oh, it's okay. I know that, we looked hard, but I know it's walking around alive." I have no idea, right? Like I have no
No.
clue. I
No.
went out there yesterday. I didn't see crows or buzzards flying around or anything like that. I re-walked in the woods, and there wasn't a smell but it still weighs heavily on me. In no way am I more or less confident that he is alive walking around or is not alive walking around.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
that's failure right there. That is very raw still. But part of it is also letting people know that this does happen and it's unfortunate, but you try to make sure it doesn't. And
Sure.
if something like this does, you're always doing your due diligence to try to find and recover that animal. Um, but man, sometimes it just doesn't have a happy ending.
No.
And I wish it had it ended differently. I wish I'd have went out there Sunday morning after a cool night and all of a sudden we just didn't see him because it was too dark and he was laying there 20 yards away. But
Yeah.
that was not the case. And I don't know, I'm still kind of coming to grips with it.
Yeah, it's something actually, and not to bring the book up again, but this is what the podcast is centered around. I actually wrote a chapter called The Inevitable, and my all of my friends in the bow hunting world's like, dude, you're making a mistake. Do not write about losing that animal. I'm like, well, it happened, and no one seems to want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it made me, I know I anchored that animal. It was regardless that it was gotten by a pack of coyotes. And our northern coyotes, they can be a little bigger dog. They are for sure. They're, I've seen them up 60, 65 pounds here because there are a lot of
Yeah.
them are crossed, right? And when I found that skull with his antlers 2 days later, a farmer found him actually. And I let the farmer take that skull and antlers and put it on his barn nearby where we hunt. And we drive by there. My daughter would be like, can we go around the back way? I want to see where those are. It's like this little reminder now, And that was a long time ago. I think
Mhm.
probably she was only 3 years old when that happened. She's 14 now. But it's the same thing when I talk about spot and stock turkeys. People think for some reason you're bragging about spot and stock turkeys. Well, I've got a couple of areas that are not ideal for calling them at all. It
Mm.
just will not work. And because I've sat there and it was watching turkeys, not hunting turkeys. And so I'm like, well, I've spot and stocked everything else. I'm going to get on this. How do I go about this? People are like, well, that's incredible. You got a bird that way. Well, you're not hearing about the 35 or 40 times that I failed and busted them for years before I connected. And a lot of the time, as you're aware, it's a happenstance. And that happens with losing an animal too. They're
It
tough.
does.
They're tough creatures. They are not like they don't live on your TV on YouTube and the hunting programs. They live out there where you're, like one of the guides I knew from Utah who I knew all the time. He said, you don't want to come out here and work. I'm like, why not? And he goes, there are a lot of the guys we got come out here. It's not hunting. It's about keeping them alive while they're out here with us. I'm like, oh my God,
Uh,
you know,
yeah, I mean, I've talked to
um,
guides and stuff that certainly experienced that. But yeah, man, I mean, but life is about failures, man. Like people, same buddy that's out here. He doesn't have any kids, but he's I'm not gonna say his name, but he's uncle, whatever his name is, right? To my kids.
sure.
Um, one of my best pals, and he's like, you guys are doing such a great job. Like you guys are a great couple. Your kids are so well mannered and well behaved. And I'm not bragging because I'm gonna turn this around for a second. I'm like, man, parenthood is just about making sure everybody's alive at the end of the day. Like every day I'm screwing up as a dad, as a husband, as a as a professional and everything else. But like that's also life, right? I think um, the good book tells us a pretty good story about a guy who promised everything would be perfect if he was in control, and we chose a different,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
we're supposed to make mistakes, but we're also supposed to learn from them and also become better from it. Sometimes that's sooner rather than later. And it happens.
You can relate to this without talking too much about the background with it, but I had a supervisor of one of my trade courses years ago come up to me, and I was like 4 days no sleep, and he's like, "Hey, Richardson, did you get anybody killed?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, this happened." He said, "It was just brutal." "That's great," he said, like out loud, because you had to learn from making those calls, and if you're gonna
Mhm.
make they want you to make a call, whether it's, based on that certain set of circumstances, as you're aware, that you have to deal with, whatever assets that you're dealing with to make that call over. You've got to make a damn decision.
You
And
do, right?
Brian Burkhart and I talked about this a lot related to bow hunting. He said, I said, I have found in the last 15 years, I have dropped the string on a hell of a lot less animals than I would have in the 15 years prior, 20 years prior, because I've gotten so discriminating against that now. I've really discriminated against myself on that, whatever the animal's doing or whatever animal it is.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I'll give a good example of that, right? Is like I shot and completely missed 2 deer last year
Yeah.
with trad deer and whiffed them. One was because I was shooting, I was in a tree stand. I hadn't compensated for the angle, right? I shot right over this young buck's back. And like as soon as I like, you draw back, pick a spot, and then I always tell myself as far as my process is like pick a spot, and then I say compensate if I know I'm out of a tree or if I'm shooting up. Now I'm in
Yeah.
flat coastal North Carolina, so I'm rarely shooting up at anything.
Sure.
So, but and when I was in Manitoba back in August, that's the same thing. When I got a nice bear, it's like pick a spot, compensate, and aim. So I aim a little bit lower. And I didn't. I like deer. Boom. And it was like I was like as soon as I released that arrow, like it's in slow motion, I knew that I had not followed a process, not much less the process. And I'm just blessed that arrow you shot 4 inches over that deer's back. The other time I shot and missed a doe, and I hunt this place. I got a pasture buddy in town. He's got 5 acres, and everybody in this neighborhood has anywhere from like 3 to 7 acres.
Yeah.
And so large yards, but every time these deer would come in, it'd be 4 or 5 does at the same time. And it's a lot of noses and eyeballs and ears in your little bubble, right?
Yeah.
And they were alert. They didn't know where I was, but they knew something was up. And I had an open shot, a very clean shot that I was a very capable shot, picked a spot. But honestly, that doe ducked like belly to the ground. Like she ducked that arrow with ease, and they all took off and snorted and everything else.
Yeah.
I was talking to my buddy Corey Hawk about it. Actually, he was like, I don't shoot since I started transitioning to self bow. I don't shoot alert deer, at alert deer.
Right.
He's like, they're just like when you're shooting 150 to 190 feet per second with a self bow, which is still slower than like a recurve, right? It's just like there's more chance for them to duck an arrow. It's a quieter bow, right? It's much
Sure, of course, 100%.
But particularly in kind of these suburban settings, those deer there's so many flags, right? There's so many eyeballs and ears and noses when you're within 20 yards. That can be setting them off. So like let them come in and hang out for a while before you feel that you need to make that shot. And that's something which is probably why I've let so many deer walk in close range this year, as I'm trying to tell myself, like, make sure it's a calm deer. And there's also that other point, right? Well, you need to make a decision. Like, well,
sure. Yeah,
I need to quit watching that ball go across the diamond also within the strike zone too,
Yeah.
But we'll see. Maybe I'll get it right by the end of the year.
Yeah, no kidding. I always find it easier if the animal sort of just appears and I'm zeroed on it. And some of the farmland I hunted 20 years ago, you would start seeing the animal appear like 100 yards away. So by the time it got to you, you were pretty wired.
Yeah.
You were like sitting there like, oh my God. Biggest buck I got was like that. And I had to go through this whole box breathing process when he got to within about 30 yards of me. Because I'm like, what is going on,
Yeah. I tell you, when I shot that bear in August up in Manitoba, I watched that bear for 45 minutes. Like I was sitting in my tree stand, and I got to the point where like I was at an awkward angle where like my low back was spasming.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man. So I actually like folded the seat and slowly stood up, and I leaned against the tree with just like my bow and my arrow. And like adrenaline had come and gone at that point.
Yeah.
After 45 minutes of watching this bear within 25 yards.
Yeah.
And to present a good shot. And that was like the calmest, like most collective, like shot that I've made, regardless of weapon. Because
sure. Yeah.
She was there just for so long, and it's felt good. But hunting usually rarely offers that type of situation too.
The last thing I'll say about something that occurred to me was I missed the largest buck I've ever had an opportunity to really shoot at, like really big bodied buck. I could see this doe. It was a really heavy cover, and I was going scouting. I wasn't hunting. I had my bow with me, and I wanted to scout this area because the back end of our place had been blown out by poachers that year, back end of my mom and dad. So I'd paddle across, and it was one of those, just drag the canoe up with lots of noise, threw the paddles on the ground, and grab my bow. Oh, there's a grouse. Oh no, no. And I was sort of just mushing along, and I sat down beside this little sapling maple tree. And I was looking down at the deer run. I hadn't hunted over across this creek in a few years. And I heard this doe bleat coming towards me down this old dry creek runoff that went into this, where the beavers had cut out from the creek. And it was tight cover, really tight cover. and I could see her coming along, and she was bleeding constantly. I'm like, oh, she looks like she's in heat. And behind her, I heard this, like kind of behind her. I'm like, and it turned into a hunt just like that.
Yeah.
Red plaid on and a pair of blue jeans and my old Irish setter boots on. And
Oh, it's a perfect set. And he got that.
right,
Then you're loading it back on a canoe. I mean, how
I
magical is
know. And it was like this non-scripted mess. And so I knock an arrow and I'm like, she walked by me at about maybe 6 feet. It was ridiculous. And she didn't even look at me. She just kept on going down to the creek to where the cover was, really heavy cover. And so I'm peering through the thing like this, and you just see it was like a crown coming through guiding through, and his nose was down, his tail was straight out, his whole neck was just bristled. He was fired right up. And he was like, I'm like, it was like Buckzilla. And I remember thinking, oh my God. And I pictured myself in that moment, waving to my dad across the creek. Dad, you got to help me with this deer. I pictured the shot. I pictured me recovering. All this stuff flashed through my head. And he got about 12 yards away, and he went in around these little alders. You know how alders grow in bunches?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he weaved his way around. So I'm timing it as he goes through the other alders, and I come to full draw, and he steps through the gap and stops. And I release the arrow, and the top limb hits a piece of the maple above me, and the arrow dives right underneath him. And he is out of there, like belly to the ground, scrambling away. And I remember counting as I came up to full draw. I remember counting his antlers. I wasn't even looking at the shoulder. I remember counting, like, I think I stopped at like 12 or 13 or some stupid points or something. And I refocused and I shot. And when that arrow missed, it's funny. There was that little heartbreak, but I was a kid again. And I wanted just to tell my dad about what had happened, because it was not just the buck, it was the doe and the happenstance and the whole mess of what I just kind of been airdropped into. And I thought, I went across that creek, Matt, no word of a lie. I must have gone across that creek the rest of the season from first light to noon, like a ninja. And I never saw another deer in there. Like I went across there. It was just that moment in time, and I remember that it was one of the first Easton permographic like classics they had. I remember that red turkey fletch just going right underneath his tummy of his foreleg, of his stomach, and miss, and then having him blow out like he'd been, jumped by a ghost or something. I'll never forget that as long as I live,
Man, that's that full experience though, right? From the unexpected to seeing this doe, she was vocal, he was vocal, the whole process. I mean, that's a whirlwind of emotions and sensory, which makes the story that much better, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, sat there for the better part of that year, and no, nothing else. That was it.
Never saw that big guy.
It's all that God gave me on that creek side that year. Gave me the whole thing. It's really been an honor to have you on. This is the inaugural change to the podcast, and I want to talk to other, like I said, grassroots bow hunters and bowyers like yourself to get a perspective that I sometimes think isn't kind of brought out as much as it could or should be these days. Whether it's traditional bow hunting or any other type of hunting,
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been hunting for a long time, but in the traditional space, I'm still very much a greenhorn in my mind. And I appreciate folks like you and the folks at, PBS and Compton that I've met along the way, because I've had some awesome fellowship that I haven't experienced in any other community. Folks that are willing to help piecemeal, some advice or critique, or share hunting stories, or drink bourbon around the fire, or the guys that I was just with up in Kodiak, early in October, Burkhart and team. I mean, it was just tremendous fellowship, and I appreciate that a knuckle dragger like me is just welcomed into a circle of all these fine folks.
Give me one sentence on Kodiak, because I didn't get to talk about that. Give me one sentence of your whole experience on Kodiak, because that's pretty incredible.
One sentence, man. There's a lot of up.
even a description. Give me a quick.
There's a lot of up for sure.
Right.
It's weird, man. So like I've hunted, in like Idaho and Montana and Colorado, but like when you get off the skiff in Kodiak, it's immediately going straight up the mountain.
Right.
But the
Wow.
vegetation is what's the tail kicker. It's not the vertical. It's like everything there wants to grab you, trip you, or stab you
Right.
while you're trying to go up. So you're going through timber or through brush and thorns that are as tall as you, while you're also going up, the steep incline up the mountain and trying to be quiet at the same time. So there's that. But the natural beauty, as far as I'm concerned, is also like uncomparable. So it was worth it. I did not come back with a deer. Only two of the 8 people in the hunting party. A lot of seasoned veterans with Tradbo and hunting and Kodiak went up there. Only two guys came back with a blacktail. But man, I'm already trying to figure out how to get back to Alaska next year.
A buddy of mine that hunted Kodiak about 20 years ago said the best part about Kodiak for me was going through this brush off the edge of where they were dropped off. And he said, going through this brush and like 10 feet away, this grizzly head pops up. Surprise! Like I'm in here with you. And he said it was like, wow, never thought I'd see anything like that. Like he
It's
said,
man,
he
it's
was like,
humbling.
I'm 10 feet. I can smell this thing when it stood up. And he said, it got down and took off. But he's like, there was always that thing in the back of his head when he was in his sleeping bag that night saying, what if it didn't take off? And it was 10 feet from me. And
Man, the closest I saw a grizzly when I was out there was about 250 yards, and he was a giant humpback, silver-tipped hair
oh, wow.
boar, and I was just like, and that's you just turn around, you're like, I'm not going this whole section today. I was planning on hunting this whole mountainside. I'm
Yeah.
not touching it. Now I'm going over this side,
Yeah.
because they're so large, and I've never really been like bear afraid. I'd say bear aware, but that was like my first encounter seeing big grizzlies, and we saw them. I think for me, I saw them all but one day of the week, and to include boars and sows with cubs, I could sit and watch them through my binos all day, but. You're also
Yeah.
very aware that when you're going through the thick tag alders and stuff that are taller than you and really thick, that
Yeah.
on the bright side, there's also no way to work through that stuff stealthily. So you're probably not going to surprise anything either. But
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
it's very humbling to say the least. But it's also that's why it's so cool.
That's great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your time, and good luck with Song Dog Stick Bows. I look forward to lots more lessons learned because I'm learning stuff from watching your stuff. I've forgotten most of what I've learned, so I love watching stuff. I think it's fantastic. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. The feeling's mutual, and I've got to dive deeper into the book, man. I appreciate there's folks with big brains and commensurate experience out there. They're putting the pen to paper for folks like me to gather something from it.
Yeah, that's pretty humbling for me. I'm an amateur writer, so it comes out. It is what it is.
Hey, I still use crayons and books with pictures, so we're good.
That's awesome. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
All right, buddy. Cheers.
Don't forget to hit the links to check out our app both on Google Play and iTunes. And check out our free Ethical Predator newsletter delivered to your inbox weekly with tips and advice on all things traditional bow hunting and more. This issue, we focus on bow hunting the rut for whitetail. You can find the link for the app and newsletter in the comments. If you haven't already, check out Compton Traditional Bow Hunters, the national traditional bow hunting organization, offering great membership benefits and ensuring the traditions of bow hunting with a stick and string is alive and well, not only now, but for generations to come. We're excited to announce our new Ethical Predator Legend t-shirt and hoodie line is out. High quality apparel designed for traditional bow hunters by traditional bow hunters. More than a t-shirt and hoodie design, they represent those who follow a process of how close, not how far, hunting the hard way, and a connection to the past that brings the pursuit of game and the heritage of family together. No sights, no problem. Hit the link to get yours today. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate all the positive feedback we've been getting from folks all over the world. This confirms for us the intent we have on our message based on the 3 pillars of the code of traditional archery: weapon proficiency with the stick bow, ethics to guide us on our collective journey, and conservation with stewardship in order to protect the wildlife, woods, fields, and waterways we hunt as our themes are resonating. Take the time to leave a rating and comment. Thanks for listening in. We encourage you to immerse yourself in the art of the stick bow, shoot straight, and walk the path of the ethical predator.